Thanks everybody so much for joining us. This is going to be a really exciting conversation where we talk about the future of homelessness response in our city. Um, I will go ahead and hand it over to Mayor Matt Mahan. One more reminder that if you have a question, you can submit it via the Q&A function at the bottom of our screen. We'll start off with a 15 to 20 minute presentation from Mayor Matt Mahan before diving into your questions. Thanks so much again for everybody joining us.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was just muted there. This is an incredible turnout. We have hundreds of neighbors from across San Jose on the webinar now. I'm Matt Mahan, your mayor, and really appreciate you all taking the time to be here. We're going to discuss the biggest challenge facing our city right now, which is unsheltered homelessness, and really want to get into, as we head into this budget cycle, what we can do to address this crisis. We're going to have to get much more pragmatic, more cost effective, and I want to really give you a deep dive on what I'm proposing, because again, we are heading into our budget cycle and have to face some significant trade-offs. So, Sammy, are we ready to start the slide deck? We have hundreds of neighbors from across the city on this webinar. I'm going to give you a roughly 12 to 15-minute overview of where we are and what I think we need to do and what I'm proposing in this budget message that is coming out tomorrow for next fiscal year's budget, and then we'll get into your questions. So, Sammy, let's jump right in. How did we get here? You all see the crisis on our streets every single day. This is consistently ranked as the #1 issue that San Jose residents want to see us fix in the city of San Jose. And while we can't solve it alone as a city, we need our county and state and federal government to lean in and help us. We're not going to advocate responsibility. We have to do a better job of getting people indoors faster, more cost effectively. So how did we get here? Well, this is really a collective public policy failure, years of a series of decisions that led us to this point. You're probably familiar with the fact that California defunded its mental health hospital system. We really lack the inpatient treatment beds that we need for people suffering from mental illness and addiction. We also made a decision many years ago to stop investing in shelter in California. We have not expanded our shelter capacity. And then more recently, we've seen the cost of construction go up, even though we've had job growth in places like Silicon Valley. Our urban centers continue to add jobs. People continue to move into our urban areas, and yet we have not been building housing. And so the high cost of construction and the lack of new home construction due to a variety of regulatory barriers and taxes and fees and all sorts of policy decisions that we made have led to a situation in which our most vulnerable residents, those who have suffered from job loss, health issues, including mental illness and addiction, are most likely to be displaced to our streets and to get trapped into a cycle of life in our encampments. So let me talk a little bit about what we've been doing. If we go to the next slide, Sammy, what we've been doing as a government over the last couple decades has really been a shift toward building publicly subsidized, affordable, and supportive housing. And it works for those who get it. For the lucky few, it's been effective, actually. Getting people indoors, connected to services, having that rent be low and restricted has worked for those who have benefited from it. But it's been hard to scale this approach. As you can see in the chart, here in San Jose today, we have 4,500 people roughly living outside in our streets and our creeks. To build publicly subsidized, affordable housing, and I'm not saying we don't need it, we certainly do, but the cost of construction is about $1 million a door, and it's taking over 5 years to build these projects. So just to shelter those who are homeless today in San Jose would cost $4.5 billion that we frankly don't have. One of the things we've done in San Jose in the last couple of years is pivot to be more cost-effective, more innovative. We've been investing in something called emergency interim housing. If we go to the next slide, these are these smaller modular units on government-owned land. People get their own individual rooms with a door that locks. They get connected to case management. And we've seen that these units are very effective at getting people indoors quickly, stabilizing them, keeping them housed. In fact, 70% of people who have ever entered one of these sites has remained housed even up to 3 years later. Half of them have graduated to permanent housing through a variety of means, including new permanent housing, but also reconnecting with family, for example, relocating to a less expensive market. We have also seen that overall calls for service for crime and blight in the neighborhoods in which we've built these have actually gone down because we're getting people out of encampments. So this has been an effective model. We've been able to build these faster, about 1/5 the time, a year versus 5 years, and about 1/10 the cost, about $100,000 versus $1 million. So part of our strategy is to finish the projects in the pipeline. We approved these last year. We have 784 additional modular units on government-owned land spread across the city that we want to finish. But as you saw probably in the last slide, Sammy, if we just go back for a moment, what you'll see here is this still has real challenges when it comes to scale. To shelter everyone on our streets today with this approach, we would need $450 million and a lot of sites. And we don't have that money in the budget. In fact, why don't we go forward to the next couple of slides, Sammy? We actually have to face a fiscal reality, especially as we head into this budget cycle, that means we have constrained budgets. We actually have revenue slowing down. We have cost pressures. We recently approved new employment contracts, and we've got increasing costs at City Hall. And so we're going to have to get more efficient. I also want to note, not only do we have a slight projected deficit this year because of slowing revenue, but we have some new obligations. I'm going to get to the stormwater permit issue in a moment. That's the $25 million shortfall you see there. We also have a number of programs that we funded in the budget last year on a one-time basis. In fact, many of them had been funded for multiple years on a one-time basis. Now that we're facing a deficit, we have to reconcile that with other priorities in the budget. So overall, we estimate we have about a $52 million shortfall between the services we funded last year, the things we need to do for our stormwater permit, which I'll speak to in just a moment, and the revenues that we are actually going to have. So it's time for us to make some tough decisions. So we cannot continue to just rely on even the interim housing solution to scale the alternatives to encampment. Sammy, if we go to the next slide, I want to share that what that stormwater permit issue is about. I mentioned the $25 million shortfall there. We recently learned that the State Water Quality Control Board, actually the Regional Water Quality Control Board, rejected our plan to be in compliance with the Clean Water Act. And what this means is that we have to put forward a plan that would significantly reduce the amount of trash and bio-waste going into our waterways. And if we fail to do that, if we fall out of compliance with the Clean Water Act, the city can be subject to incredibly significant legal and financial risk. In fact, the Water Board can fine us up to $60,000 per day per pollutant in the water. And we know from the studies that we've done that the vast majority, probably about 90% of the trash and the bio-waste in the waterways has to do with the fact that we have unmanaged encampments along our creeks. So we're going to be forced to do this. This is the state and the federal government stepping in and saying, we're not going to be lax anymore. You've got to deal with this. And they're going to give us that push to do the really hard thing, which in my view is that we've got to get people out of our creeks and out of our streets. Now, the risk here is, I'm going to slow down to just emphasize this point. If we do not embrace faster, more cost-effective, more scalable solutions to unsheltered homelessness, the risk here is that in becoming compliant with our stormwater permit, we end up simply moving 1,000+ people out of our waterways and into our neighborhoods. That is an unacceptable outcome. We have to have places for people to go. So that's what I want to talk about now, Sam. If we go to the next slide, The permanent affordable units are great for those who get them, but $1 million a door in 5 years to build is not scaling. The emergency interim units also work really well. They actually get almost similar outcomes at a fraction of the cost and time, but even that is not scalable to $100,000 a unit in over a year to build. To move quickly, to move people off of our streets and out of our waterways, which is now incredibly important, faster and more cost effectively, we're going to have to get really pragmatic here. We're going to have to experiment with things that we haven't done a lot of in recent years. And I want to walk through what those actually are. So why don't we go through some of the examples of the kinds of interventions and solutions that we're going to need. One is safe sleeping. In San Diego, they just stood up a safe sleeping site, basically a managed campground with 400 tents, and they were able to clear a couple of the worst encampments in the city by saying, here's a safe managed place with security and sanitation and basic services. You can sleep here and in a sturdy stand-up tent with a cot, but you can't be out in this unmanaged encampment. I think we're going to have to experiment with safe sleeping sites. Safe parking. We have one safe parking site open with 40 spots. We have another larger site that is moving forward in the Berryessa area, thanks to Councilmember Cohen's leadership. That will add some capacity, but we have over 800 RVs and other lived-in vehicles across the city. We're going to need places for those folks to go. Let's keep going. Congregate shelter. I mentioned earlier, part of what has led to this crisis, in addition to defunding the mental health hospitals, failing to build enough housing, putting up a lot of restrictions on building housing in the state of California, is that we also, as a state, decided not to invest in shelter. And while congregate shelter has a lot of challenges, I think we have to leave that on the table and experiment with expanding congregate shelter. I think we can do it better than we've done it in the past. I don't think we should have it be at massive scale. I think we need it to be human scale, and we need to manage it very carefully. But we're going to need things that, again, are faster to build, more cost effective, more scalable, given the magnitude of this crisis and the fact that we have to treat it like a crisis, like a true emergency with over 4,000 people out there. Let's keep going. That's congregate shelter as a solution. We're also, in my budget proposal, asking for money to pilot a program called Homeward Bound. Other cities, including San Francisco, do this. We do this in a very limited way in our interim housing communities. But we want to help people reconnect with family. We know that roughly 1 in 5 people in our county who are homeless were not last living at an address in our county. And so helping people reconnect with family, relocate, move in with family members, maybe move back to a town where they have a support network and help them with first month's rent, for example, really being pragmatic about giving people what they need to get back on their own 2 feet, not relying on the system to build a brand new home for every person who needs it, because we're just not finding that it's scalable. So we're going to have to try a lot of different things. Prevention is another area where we want to increase our investment. We know that a significant number of people who become homeless because they just had a job loss and or an unexpected health issue that put them into debt and they fell behind on the rent. We can help step in and keep people stably housed and give them a bridge until they can stabilize, find a new job, increase income, or find a more affordable place to live. Once they fall into homelessness, it becomes much more expensive, actually, and much harder to help them turn that around. We can also use our workforce development programs at the city to target the folks who are about to fall into homelessness, to help them find higher paying jobs, gain new skills, and really, work toward greater stability economically. So that's another form of prevention. So I think looking more closely at those who are becoming homeless, we also know, by the way, that a major source of people falling into homelessness are folks coming out of public systems already, coming out of the jail system and having a failed reentry process, coming out of the foster care system. So really partnering with the county and being strategic about the sources of homelessness, what it is that's causing people to fall into homelessness. Let's keep going. Last couple of slides here. So as we are investing in more scalable and pragmatic solutions, safe sleeping, safe parking, congregate shelter, reconnecting people with family, doing more upstream prevention, things that can help us actually start to truly turn the corner and address this issue at scale with the resources we have, which again are quite limited. We also need to better manage what's going on day to day at the street level. So, one of the things that's in the budget message that's coming out tomorrow is a good neighbor policy proposal. I believe that we need to have a codified code of conduct where we say very clearly these are our expectations for everyone, whether you're housed or unhoused, whether you're living in a single family home, an apartment building, an RV, or a tent in our city. There have to be a common set of rules and expectations. And we have to really hold everyone accountable to those expectations from a sanitation standpoint, a public safety standpoint. You can see here RVs that have gotten really run down with a lot of belongings out in the public right of way versus those that are much better managed and kept up. We can help people come into compliance with our codes and our rules, and we should, but we need to have standards that we hold folks to. That particularly is true when it comes to fire risk, to crime coming from encampments, and to public health issues where we need the county to really help us enforce our public health rules so that we're all living in a safe and clean city. And then, Sammy, if we go to the next slide, we also need to preserve our progress. This is something we've begun to do in San Jose over the last year. When we spend millions of dollars in taxpayer money to offer people housing and shelter, to connect them to services, to help them move out of encampments and into something better, a safer, more managed site with services, and then we clear an encampment and we clean up an area, again, at great expense to taxpayers. If that's public space or it's an area that is truly not suitable for human habitation because it's right next to a busy road, for example, or a freeway, we need to then prevent re-encampment. You can see here an example where we had someone living right next to a freeway and a major thoroughfare in the city. We offered them housing multiple times, helped them relocate out of the area, cleaned it up, and decided this is an area where we're just not going to allow re-encampment. We're doing the same thing along a stretch of the Guadalupe downtown where we have a public park that needs to be accessible to the public and frankly wasn't for a few years now. And so, of course, preserving our progress and enforcing a code of conduct is most viable when we have somewhere to offer people. That's really the right way to approach this, is to build safe, dignified alternatives to encampments, require that people at a minimum come indoors, come into a safe space if it's being provided, and then we can enforce no re-encampment and really start to slowly bring down the number of encampments around the city rather than just kind of chase them around the city by abating them every few months, which isn't good for those who are homeless and doesn't actually ultimately solve anything for the broader community. So that in a nutshell, Sam, if you go to the last slide here, the budget message that comes out tomorrow talks about crime and public safety. It talks about blight. It talks about economic development, services for children and youth. It gets into a number of different issues that the city is responsible for, but we wanted to focus in on homelessness. It's the biggest challenge facing our city. It's a moral challenge. It's a fiscal challenge. It's an environmental risk factor. We have an imperative to do a better job on homelessness. And given the financial realities, given that we're heading into a year with a slight deficit, given that we have this new mandate regarding our stormwater permit, more of the same isn't going to cut it. We're not going to be able to do things the way that we did and expect a different result. We're going to need more scalable, more cost-effective solutions like safe sleeping, safe parking, more prevention, and we need to do a better job of holding people accountable to basic expectations of safety and sanitation as long as anyone is living outdoors in our city. So that's all in the message. If you support the message, and obviously we'll have more questions and the message will be live tomorrow. You can read the full 30-page document tomorrow when it's live. But if you support the message, we're asking you to join us in advocating for it because it's going to require tough trade-offs. We're going to ask our city council to make some tough decisions, to embrace new strategies, to shift dollars from other priorities because we have to make trade-off decisions like any of you do with your household budget. We have to decide what's most important and what's going to have the highest impact. And once we get the city to embrace those solutions, we need to keep working together to do the same thing with our county and our state. We need our elected leaders at the county level and the state level to support us in the ways that they can, building out our mental health system, addiction treatment, dealing with all of the health and human services that they have the legal jurisdiction and the funding to provide. So we'll get to that, but for this week, the focus is really on the city's budget process, which kicks off tomorrow with my March budget message, and then is finalized in June with my second message after the council has gone through a multi-month process of discussing the budget, debating trade-offs, and basically giving city staff input. So that's what the process looks like over the next few months. You can scan that QR code or go to the short link down below it to sign up to be part of the effort to do advocacy and push the council and all of our levels of government to be more pragmatic and help us actually be on the path to ending the era of encampments. So I know we have a lot of questions. I want to appreciate everybody who's here. We have an incredible turnout tonight and a ton of questions. So I'm going to hand it back to Tasha to she'll be moderating the questions, and I'll do my best to go a little deeper into some of these topics.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a reminder for folks, we will be only answering questions via the Q&A function. So if you have a question, please submit it now. We have over 100 questions, so we will not be able to get through all of them live, but we will follow up with you via email to get you answers. So again, go ahead and drop your question in the Q&A function if you have it. Before we go over to your questions, we actually have a poll. Sammy will launch the poll and you should see it on your screen. So if you're interested in advocating, supporting the mayor's budget message, please go ahead and submit your answer, and we'll be following up with different opportunities for you to support, whether that's via emailing your council member or showing up in person at city council meeting next week. There are a lot of ways to support, whether you join us in person or not. So again, we'll keep this question open for another couple moments so you can vote whether you're willing to advocate or not for the mayor's budget message, whether you think we need faster, cheaper solutions to get people out of our encampments. Just a couple more seconds. All right. Well, thank you so much to those of you who voted. We're going to go ahead and end this poll right now, but you're always able to advocate, of course. All right, so we'll go to our first question, which is from Kimberly. So Mayor, this first question is, what will we do if our homeless neighbors don't want to accept help or housing and want to stay living in our streets or rivers?
Yeah, thanks, Tasha, and thank you, Kimberly, for that question. I get this question a lot, and let me try to break it down for folks. So what we have found is, believe it or not, while there are people out there who refuse help, and I will answer that question, we do find that the majority of people, if offered safe, dignified shelter, will accept it. We have a long waiting list actually for our little modular units. And at any given time, our shelter capacity in the city is essentially 100% full with a waiting list. So first order of business is to expand capacity. But as I mentioned, we don't have the resources to really put a dent in this issue and be in compliance with the Clean Water Act over the next couple of years, which we need to be if we're doing it at $1 million a door, and even if we're doing it at $100,000 a door, which is why I'm advocating that we push ourselves to be even more efficient and pragmatic here. So the majority of people will come in if offered a dignified place with sanitation, maybe meals, some case management, a space that's safe, that is an alternative to the very unsafe life on the streets. I believe that when we get to that point where we have helped those who want to be helped, we need to continue to add capacity. And the consequence for refusing to accept shelter, frankly, is not to criminalize homelessness and arrest somebody. It's to abate encampments. That's the primary incentive. It is not fun to be abated. I don't advocate for it if we're not able to offer someone shelter. I think we really have a responsibility to give people an option, a safe place to go. But ultimately, it cannot, in a complex, modern, functioning city of our size, it can't simply be a personal choice or a lifestyle decision to decide I want to live outside when I'm being offered safe shelter. And so we will clean up encampments at a higher frequency, ask people to move along so we can clean up an area or restore it to public use, which is often a challenge along our trails and in our parks and in places that aren't safe. And so abatement is the primary incentive. And I think over time, if offered repeatedly safe, dignified shelter or to be abated and have an area cleaned up and be asked to move along, eventually I'd like to think the majority, the vast majority, will accept that and make the rational decision. Now, that being said, there's a small portion of small but meaningful portion of the folks out there who have severe behavioral health issues, serious mental illness and addiction. And I advocated very strongly last year for the state to pass SB 43, and the state did. And we are starting to see a movement. The pendulum is finally, 50 years later, starting to swing back to adding more inpatient treatment and expanding what's called conservatorships, where you can actually compel someone to come indoors for at least a period of time to detox, to get counseling, to get out of what could be a very bad situation that they may be trapped in. And so we're starting, I don't want to pretend that that's going to change things overnight. We have to build inpatient treatment centers. We have to rebuild the mental health hospital system at least a bit. We need to have those, we need to hire the folks who specialize in these services. But the goal is certainly to expand that capacity. That's only something the state and county can do, by the way. We don't have the authority at the city level to provide healthcare. We don't have the funding. That is something where we can work together. In fact, I need your help to advocate to our county supervisors and our state representatives to make sure that we are adding that capacity. And frankly, when somebody's not able to make a rational decision, when they have lost their free will to serious addiction or mental illness, we've got to step in. The humane thing to do is to get them into a safe environment and give them a chance through counseling, medication, other techniques to try to regain some control over their lives, to make better decisions. And so certainly that is also a part of the answer here. But I think that if we could scale up shelter and it was safe and dignified, and we were willing to tell people, here's your option, or your encampment's going to be abated, you're probably looking at what would be a 70 to 80% reduction in unsheltered homelessness just with that solution alone, before you even have to get into things like conservatorship. Okay, Tasha, hopefully I explained that reasonably well. I'm going to turn it back to you for the next question.
Thanks, Mayor. And just a reminder, I do see some folks raising their hands. If you want to submit a question, you can only do it via the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. So this next question is from Samantha. Mayor, how do you overcome the NIMBY objections? Every district is impacted, yet there are always overwhelming opposition if anything is proposed in any given district.
Yeah, thank you, Tasha, and thanks, Samantha. It's a great question. What I have seen is a real shift in our community because people are so fed up with the conditions on our streets. I mean, the truth is, well, people generally don't want to have a homeless shelter in their neighborhood or a treatment center or whatever the solution might be. I think people are starting to realize that the single worst outcome is the status quo today, leaving thousands of people to live and die on our streets. We spend over $10 million a year just cleaning up the trash and bio waste on our streets. That's not helping anybody. That's just money basically lighting on fire, but we got to do it. So, not to mention the immense human suffering, the impact on the environment, small business, everybody's quality of life. The status quo is frankly unsustainable. What we've seen is we've actually built 6 of these quick build communities, the interim modular units. So we have 6 of them up in operation. And when we started, hundreds of people would come out and protest because it was new, it was scary, it was change, it was something different. And over time, we've actually seen the community come around to embracing these. We have 3 more in the pipeline, new sites, and we have, down at Cherry Avenue in District 9, where we'll be adding a new site and creating a water resource protection zone and actually abating that area of the creek and then keeping it clear forevermore. The neighborhood's very supportive. They'd rather see the solutions. They'd rather see people out of the encampments. They'd rather see accountability for coming indoors and getting connected to services than the status quo, because it's gotten that bad. So I think we're going to have to be honest with the community that if you want change, there has to be some investment, some sacrifice. There are things we're going to have to do. Now, I will say San Jose is doing a lot, and we have more than our fair share of the burden here, at least when it comes to our county, as do all big cities. It's a big city problem. And we really, again, this is an area where advocating to all of our county supervisors, all of whom have constituents in the city of San Jose, by the way, all 5 of whom, and telling them we want to see fair share policies. We want the county to locate shelter and supportive housing and safe sleeping and parking and treatment centers and all the things they're also funding. We want to see those distributed across the county, not just in San Jose, though we want their support here as well. So I think it's being honest with people. I think it's demonstrating that these sites are well run, and they are. Our interim communities, as I mentioned, have kept 70% of people housed up to 3 years later. That's how much data we have. They've helped 50% of the people who have ever entered a site graduate to permanent housing. And in the neighborhoods around the sites, we've actually seen a reduction in calls for service for crime and blight. Are they perfect? No, but they are a huge improvement over the unmanaged tent encampments on our streets today. So I think we just have to keep educating the community. We have to show that we're making every effort to spread these out and spread the burden as equally as possible. We have to show that they're well run. And then we have to push our leaders at the county and state level to make sure that countywide and statewide, the burden's being distributed evenly. But in the long run, we're all going to be better off if we can start by just getting everybody stably sheltered in a site with some basic security and sanitation and case management. We will all benefit, even though it requires some short-term sacrifice. Okay, let's keep going.
All right. So our next question is from Nathan. Mayor, will there be long-term solutions for our unhoused neighbors as well?
I'm sorry, will there be long-term solutions?
Yes. That is where the question ends, but I'm assuming
Yeah.
they need, yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure I had the question. Okay. Well, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, I mean, look, I think part of what we have to do is build a lot more housing. And we have invested over $250 million in affordable housing in the city of San Jose in the last 5 years. At the county level, we passed $1 billion bond measure to build more affordable housing. The state has invested billions more. We're talking about a regional housing measure to build more affordable housing. So I think we're going to continue to invest in affordable housing. But I think we have to be honest that the amount that we can tax ourselves to subsidize affordable housing relative to the need, there's a mismatch there. And it's just very slow and expensive to build. It's great for those who get it. But I think we're going to also, in California, we're going to have to look in the mirror. We're going to have to understand why it is that housing production has dropped off so significantly over the last couple of decades. We've made it really hard to build. We've added a lot of restrictions and barriers. We've got pages of impact fees that we can add. We've made it so expensive that even here in San Jose, even where we want to build housing, we're not able to get it financed. In fact, we have approved about 8,000 apartments in our downtown over the last few years that are plans sitting on a shelf because they can't get financing, because the cost to build is higher than they can get in rent or for sale value on the other side. So I think we have to step back on housing. And yes, my argument is, let's address the crisis we have today by getting every person on our streets into basic, dignified shelter or a treatment center, or let's triage that population and get people into something basic, safe, dignified with some on-site services as a starting point. Let's continue to build affordable housing, but work on getting the cost down. How do we speed up approvals? How do we reduce requirements? How do we bring down the cost per unit? And then I think we're going to have to grapple with the fact that long-term, the only way to build enough housing to meet demand is to remove some of these barriers that we've created and allow the private marketplace to build housing again in California. And in our big cities, we've basically killed the housing production market. We just don't build a lot of housing anymore. We need to make it possible to build up in places like downtown and near transit and in places where we can sustain greater density. It's a losing battle otherwise. We can stabilize people and save their lives and save our environment and make everybody's quality of life better. We've got to make it easier to build up. in our downtowns and near transit and allow for that housing production to happen again. I think we have to have a market approach to this, or we're never going to get the scale that we need. All right, Tasha, do we have another question?
Do, and just a reminder, there are hundreds of questions, so we will not be able to get through all of them, but we will follow up via email afterwards. So don't worry, even if your question is not answered live tonight, we will get a response to you. So this next question is from an anonymous user. Mayor, how can we ensure that the cities surrounding us, Santa Clara, Morgan Hill, Cupertino, Palo Alto, etc., do their part in housing residents that live within their limits instead of them busing those individuals to San Jose?
Great question. And this is where we really need help from the county and the state. Now, we can attempt to put some requirements on starting with serving those who were last living in an address in our city. And I know some other cities and counties have looked at this. It's a little hard in practice to prove people who have been chronically homeless, who are dealing with behavioral health challenges, may not have proof of where they were last living. We can try to create some criteria on the front end. I also think, though, that we need the county and the state, who are also investing in these solutions, to actually spread their investments and not just concentrate the services and the supportive housing and the shelter that they're investing in the big cities that have the challenge today. We need, and we're seeing this in some places. Mountain View has been a great actor on this in recent years. Sunnyvale has been a good actor. We also know, by the way, that as bad as our challenges are in San Jose, on a per capita basis, it's actually worse in South County. Gilroy actually has a bigger problem per capita than we do. And we need to help them to address homelessness in Gilroy so that we don't have a situation where we move forward shelter and then Gilroy's looking to San Jose to be the solution for it. So we're going to need to spread our bets. We as a city really only have control over what happens within our borders, but we can advocate and demand that our county and state leaders are funding these solutions in an equitable way, that they're spreading their investments out. Because as much as I want county and state support for these sites, I would like to see them building shelter, converting motels, building treatment centers, also in Palo Alto and Cupertino and Santa Clara and other parts of the county that may not be a part of the solution to homelessness. So I think that the answer is primarily that we've got to advocate to leaders, at our elected officials who represent us at the county and state level. But locally, we certainly look at a local preference. When we open a site, we don't just go advertise it widely. We start doing very hands-on tactical outreach in the neighborhood in which that site is opened. We are focused on first placing people who live near a new site, an interim housing site, or if it's a safe parking or safe sleeping site. We do focus really down at the neighborhood level on how do we make this neighborhood better off. Okay, why don't we keep going? Tasha, who's next?
All right, so next we have Elaine. Elaine is wondering how we will ensure that once a sweep of a creek or waterway is executed, that the people will not return or others will not move into that area.
That's a good question. So that's under that concept of preserving our progress. And what we've been able to do, we just did this at the Guadalupe River along a stretch in the downtown from about 280 up to Julian. We had over 100 people encamped for a couple of years along the river, right in the heart of downtown, near our cultural venues, near big employers, near residents. And we actually got a grant from the state of California to, quote unquote, resolve the encampment. And so how did we do that? We went out to folks and did outreach for weeks, offered people shelter. In some cases, we're able to offer supportive housing, offered people services, and many came in. Some, to the earlier question, were not ready to accept help, and they moved along. Which means they moved down the river, frankly. We cleaned up the area, and then we posted signs. We said, per the municipal code, this is an area where we do not allow encampments, and if you return, you'll be immediately abated, meaning we will come out with outreach workers, with SJPD, and we will require that you move to another area. Now, I think that in the long run, that notion of preserving our progress and preventing re-encampment and enforcing city laws that say that you can't camp in public space, for example, that only works if we have shelter to offer people. As you've seen, and we'll see what the Supreme Court does with the couple of the cases in front of the court this year, while we have a ban on camping outside, and it's not allowed technically, there's an overriding interpretation of the law that says that we cannot criminalize homelessness, and we don't. So it's a little bit of a gray area in that we can't just ban encampments everywhere. Now, my logic thus far has been when we spend millions of dollars and we do offer housing and supportive services, and we make all of this effort to get people out of a public space like a park, and we've moved many people indoors and we've cleared the encampment, it is illogical for us to just allow it to get re-encamped and then have to spend all that money all over again. But you can only scale that up to a citywide strategy if you add a lot of shelter capacity. That's why I think we've got to look at, again, I keep using this word scale. How do we do things at real volume? Because we have over 4,000 people outside. So we're going to need congregate shelter, safe sleeping, safe parking. We're going to need to do more prevention to reduce the flow of new people falling into homelessness wherever they may be coming from, whether it's our jail system, our foster care system, or living on a neighbor's couch, So ultimately, though, the answer is we post a sign and it's legally enforceable that we can ask people to move along, but we are not actually legally able to do that citywide unless we're offering shelter to those who are out there. All right, Tasha, what's next?
All right, we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Mayor Matt, can you discuss how you're working with Caltrans and Valley Water to address encampments on their property?
I appreciate this question. I spend a lot of time, my team and I spend a lot of time on the phone with other agencies. It's kind of shocking the extent to which those jurisdictional issues can get in the way. We do our best to reach out to the other public agencies that own land and therefore have certain control over that land, jurisdiction within the city of San Jose. So Caltrans along our freeways being the most significant. Valley Water, of course, we also have VTA and the county are other significant public agencies, and the city expressways are the county for the most part. So what we're trying to do, and I actually have a section in this budget message for those of you who actually read the message when it comes out tomorrow. I have a section that is speaking to deeper collaboration. In an ideal world, what I'd like to see us move toward is a legal framework, a memorandum of understanding where we actually put in writing our respective responsibilities and that the city has more leeway to go on to other public agencies' land and clean up that land, do cleanups, if necessary, do abatements, do outreach and offer people shelter and services, maybe cover up graffiti faster. One of my great frustrations is going around the city and seeing an encampment or graffiti that's really gotten out of control. It's just been there for weeks, if not months, if not longer. And so, in the coming months, and we'll follow up with all of you, there will be opportunities for you to reach out to the elected leaders at the Water District, at Valley Transportation Agency, VTA, at Caltrans, and their leadership to encourage them to be even more collaborative. I don't want to say they haven't been collaborative, but to have a deeper partnership with the city so we can move faster. Because the big delay is they don't have big teams that offer housing and services and do abatements. They don't have the kind of homeless outreach capacity that the city does. And even we don't have nearly enough capacity, but they usually put us on a list and 6 months later come along and ask us to help them. So we need to really tighten that partnership and put more resources into outreach and abatements and getting people into shelter, assuming we're scaling it up. Okay, Tasha, what's our next question?
Thanks, Mayor. Our next question is from another anonymous user. Do we have any dashboards of statistics showing how our new approaches are working?
We do. We have a couple. The housing department has one that gives you a fair amount of data about the current snapshot of homelessness in our county and our city specifically. We also have just launched dashboards that I advocated for last year, got into last year's budget, and they need some iteration. We've got to keep working on them. but they do track how many new sites we've built and then the performance of those of that shelter. One of the things we found by looking at the data is that these interim units are quite effective at getting people off the streets quickly, keeping them housed, helping them graduate to permanent housing, and actually reducing crime and blight in the neighborhoods in which they are placed. And that's all data driven. We measure every single person who goes into every site, their length of stay, their case management process, how long it takes them to graduate out, what outcomes they get, and to really understand, is this a good investment or not? And overall, relative to putting all of the money into solutions that cost $1 million a door and take over 5 years to build, there's been high ROI to that approach. The challenge is the costs are still significant. Even the tiny home model, it's costing about $100,000 a unit. Now, you can buy the unit for $20,000. But when you do the site prep, when you hook up the utilities, pave some parking spaces, put in the lighting, put in a laundromat, a basic kitchen, when you add the case management space, when you do all of that, it's $100,000 a unit. And then this is a very high need population. Unless we want people permanently stuck in these tiny homes, and if we want to get throughput and we want to help people get on their own 2 feet, it's service intensive. They need counseling and case management, and we feed them when they're on site, and we're helping them get job skills and job placement services because we want to help them graduate. And we're actually quite good at that. Half of the people who have ever gone into one of our interim units in the last 3 years since we started with this model have graduated out, which is success. But it's service intensive. In fact, it costs us about $30,000 per person per year to manage the services on these sites. And that means we serve a little less than 2 people. Average length of stay is 6 to 9 months. So they're not infinitely scalable. But anyway, to the question, we do have dashboards. We are looking at performance measures. We do competitively bid most of our contracts. I'd like to see that always be the case. We look at cost per outcome. We have a few different nonprofit service providers who provide the case management. And I want to see us do a lot more of that in the years ahead and really be very clear with you on here's how many people were served, here's how much it costs per year, here's the outcome that we got at this site. And we're close to that, but it's not quite there on that public dashboard, but it needs to be, and it will be. All right, let me see, Tasha, do we have another question?
We do. This next question is, why can't the city get our homeless neighbors to help clean up their encampments?
Well, that's a great question. And that's what I'm sort of pointing to with this concept of a good neighbor policy and doing more hands-on encampment management. I talked a little bit about having higher expectations for folks who are out there. I think that we need to make clear what our expectations are related to trash, related to the size of encampments, fire risk, noise. I think we should make clear that you are not allowed to drive a vehicle on public trails. I think we need to be very clear about the expectations. What is the code of conduct? What are the rules of the road? And then we need to try to do our best to support people to comply with those rules, that we actually give people the tools they need to be a good neighbor. And so when it comes to trash, I think we should give people the green trash bags, and we should tell them where to put them, and we should pick them up every week. And we do that for some of our larger encampments. There are a lot of smaller encampments, though, where we don't. And that's where you see this accumulation of trash. And so it's really, what are the rules? What are our expectations? How can we help you to comply with the rules? And then let's build shelter and get people off the street so that we don't have to keep managing encampments. But I acknowledge that at least for the next few years, we're likely going to continue to have to manage encampments. And I think to the person's question, we've got to help them do that. One thing I'll just add on that one, we have a program called San Jose Bridge that actually employs homeless people to help clean up the city. Last year, we had over 150 people in the program, and over a third of them actually graduated out of the program into a full-time job that on average paid over $20 an hour. So that's a program I would like us to scale. Again, I talked about the budget constraints. It's not a cheap program. Again, it's pretty service intensive. We got to get people housed, but we talk about that a little bit in the budget message that's coming out tomorrow. Help people work their way off the streets, gain skills, get connected to employers, and really try to find more scalable and sustainable solutions, which means helping people become more self-sufficient. So that's certainly a priority I have. To the extent that you can convey that that's a priority you have to the council, that'll help us to get more support for that in the budget in the coming years. Okay, Tasha, what's our next question?
Okay, so we have a question from Laura. Can the mayor address the issues with the Brandon Monterey project?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, thanks for the question. So Brandon Monterey is one of these interim modular communities. This one's actually stacked. It'll be 3 stories high at the intersection of Brandon and Monterey. It's 204 units and it's under construction. The plan is for it to open in the middle of the year. Some of you may have seen, certainly whoever asked the question saw a couple of days ago, there was some press that there were some complaints about some of the units apparently being water damaged and having mold and some wage compliance and wage theft complaints. So we have at the city of San Jose a code enforcement process. We have a team that follows up on these things, on any wage complaints on public projects, and certainly on our codes for housing. And I promise you, we are not going to move anyone into a unit that has been water damaged and is moldy and unsafe. We're going to do inspections and we're going to hold the contractor accountable. Now, in this case, we've got a nonprofit developer managing the project. They have a general contractor, and one of their subcontractors is bringing in the modular units. That's how these development projects work. So we're going to make sure that subcontractor is accountable for doing whatever remediation they need to do, replacing the units. They'll have to eat the cost, making sure that they are fully in compliance with paying whatever wages are due to folks if somebody's been misclassified. So the city has a quality control and enforcement function that will go out and interview the workers, look at all the data, and inspect the units. And we have had nonprofit partners and contractors build 6 of these communities in the last 3 years. They are all very high quality. They're all full. They have a waiting list of hundreds of people who are currently living in encampments. And I have every reason to believe that this site will be built to that same level of quality, that people will want these units, and that this community will work. But if there are issues, we're going to inspect, identify them, say what the issues are, and make sure they're fixed so that we can open this project in the middle of the year as we promised the community. All right, Tasha, do we have other questions?
We do. And just a reminder, we have hundreds of questions, so we will not get through all of them tonight. We have time for about 2 more questions, but your question will be answered. We will follow up with you via email. So please don't worry if your question is not answered live tonight. So this next question is, how will we prevent homeless people from coming from outside San Jose? A potential concern is that if we are successful, then that will likely attract homeless people from other cities and states, and we would be right back in the same situation we have now.
Yeah, well, first, to your first point, Tasha, I'm very impressed. I mean, the turnout here is incredible. Hundreds of questions. We had nearly 1,000 people RSVP to come and a huge turnout tonight. So just want to thank everybody for your engagement. If we're going to solve this problem, we're going to have to get really pragmatic and hold government accountable at the city level, but also the county and state level for bringing forward real solutions. So to this issue of basically incentives, right? Are we going to offer something that's so good and so effective that we end up attracting people who are homeless from all over? So couple of points on that. One is, just to be clear, I would argue that what we're doing today is probably in some ways the worst incentive possible, because we're doing almost no encampment management, not enforcing a code of conduct out on our streets, and we get you on a waiting list and then eventually maybe build a brand new $1 million apartment that, frankly, our working and middle-class residents can't even afford. So I don't think that the current model is very scalable, and I don't know if it's, frankly, fair. And so I think that, offering people basic, dignified shelter, but having it be basic and requiring that people come indoors, I actually don't believe is likely to create a stampede of unhoused people from all over the state saying, that's great, sign me up for that. I'm going to come be an encampment in San Jose so I can be required to come into shelter. I don't know that we're going to see that dynamic. it's possible. I think the best hedge against that is to do our outreach in a zone around encampments, focus on offering these solutions to the people who have already been identified as being homeless in San Jose, ideally those who were most recently homeless in San Jose. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we need, and I wish I could solve all the problems. I wish I had a magic wand here, but ultimately our success is at least partly dependent upon our elected representatives at the county level and at the state level having broader plans. San Jose can do our share. We can be innovative as we have always been. We can be more pragmatic. We can move the needle faster than other cities. But ultimately, if our county doesn't have a plan for investing in these solutions everywhere in the county, and if our state doesn't have a statewide plan, and hopefully they'll learn from what we're doing. They'll see that, hey, the tiny homes work. Hey, the safe sleeping and safe parking sites work. If we can be a model and then get our county and state leaders to invest in that same model, but spread it out where we have even cheaper public lands across the state, frankly, I think that's ultimately how we actually end unsheltered homelessness in the state of California. We have 150,000 people who are living outside in our state right now, most of them in Southern California, frankly, but all over. And what we find, though, the data indicates that the vast majority of people who are unhoused, who are in unsheltered homelessness outside, don't move great distances. There's kind of a myth that, New York sent them all to us or something. New York has the same number of homeless people per capita as we do. So does Boston. So does Chicago. The difference is those cities, because they have harsh winters, build basic shelter, and the winter actually compels people indoors. It's a forcing function on government to build dignified shelter and individuals to come inside because it's too cold. And we don't have that forcing function. Well, now we do, at least in San Jose. This stormwater permit issue coming into compliance with the Clean Water Act is going to force us to be more pragmatic. We're going to have to scale up basic shelter and do our very best to require that people come indoors so that we don't simply shift people from the creeks to the neighborhoods. So we're gonna have to be much more pragmatic and follow the lead of the big cities in the Northeast and the Midwest that have built a lot of shelter to offer an alternative during the winter to people who would otherwise be living outside in tents. Okay, let's keep going, Tasha. Who's next?
All right, so we have time. We're actually over time, but we'll answer one more question while we're on. And after this question, we'll be asking our poll question again, so please stay on for that. So this question is from Benjamin, and it's, what about people with mental health and addiction issues that are living on the streets?
Yeah, absolutely. And we touched on this a bit earlier, but I'm happy to speak more to it. So those with mental illness, with addiction, deserve our compassion and empathy. They need help. Often in serious cases, these folks, at least in this moment, are not able to exercise their free will and make rational decisions about their self-care. I mentioned earlier that I was a big supporter of expanding conservatorships, which is now happening at the state level, which would make it easier for a judge with input from a health practitioner to actually compel someone into inpatient treatment. We similarly need tools, and we're starting to move in this direction. We need tools for compelling people into drug treatment. I've supported Prop 47 reform. I think that if you're repeatedly committing crime and there's a nexus with addiction, whether it's significant and repeated possession of hard drugs, or it's hard drugs plus, being under the influence plus retail theft or some other crime, if it's repeated and you're unable to break that cycle, I actually think we have a responsibility to say, here is a secure drug treatment center and you can choose. Here's a place where you can go to get the help that you need, or we're going to put you in the timeout box. You're going to go to county jail for 30 days, or maybe even just a week to start. I think we need to create consequences, but also viable intervention. We need to offer people the services they need and give them an opportunity to rehabilitate, to get on a better path. We need to give them every opportunity to realize their full potential, but we also have to create some consequences and properly intervene. And so I think that when it comes to addiction and mental illness, the first option should really be offering people the service and doing so repeatedly. I think we know for serious cases, we need inpatient care. It's not enough to tell somebody in a tent that they can sign up and show up once a month or once every couple of weeks for a counseling session. We need to get them indoors and stabilized with more intensive case management. We know that in some cases, conservatorship will be required or some other method of compulsion, not locking somebody up and throwing away the key, but saying, you're unable to make a rational decision. You're on the verge of starving to death or dying on our streets. We're going to have you come indoors for 90 days and give you a chance to stabilize and then give you a choice again. And I think we're going to need, and I think over time you kind of ratchet up the consequence and the level of intervention if people are unable to make good decisions that keep them safe and alive and that protect the broader community. So I think that the pendulum is finally swinging back. We're getting a bit more pragmatic on these issues in California, and I'm very supportive of it because I think it will not only benefit our whole community in myriad ways, I think it'll frankly save lives and help a lot of people lead fuller lives if we're a little stronger in our compassionate interventions and creating accountability for getting access and taking advantage of care. Happy to talk more about that. I'll also, Tasha, just before you wrap it up there, on that point, again, just for those of you who don't know, I know government is so confusing and complicated, but we don't have any ability, we don't manage the healthcare system or supportive services at the city level. That, again, is your state and county. What can we do at the city level? Well, we can build shelter, safe sleeping, safe parking, congregate shelter, interim. We build housing. We do land use. We hire police officers. We can enforce good neighbor policies. We can help reconnect people with family. We can do job training. We can do job placement. There's a lot of things we can do at the city level. But when it comes to mental illness, when it comes to addiction, when it comes to the jails and prisons and the reentry programs, when it comes to the foster care system, those are county programs, typically with some state funding and state mandates as well. And that's why it's so important that as we get beyond this city budget and we hopefully pass a common sense back to basics budget in San Jose this year that do some of the things I just mentioned, that we also put our focus on our elected representatives at the county and the state level and telling them very clearly, we want more inpatient treatment. We want more intervention and accountability for dealing with serious addiction, that we want to prevent the stem of people coming out of our jails and foster care systems becoming homeless. And we expect them to be more pragmatic and do more as well, and to spread it out fairly, not just to do it all in San Jose, but to spread it across our county, across our state. So we covered a lot of ground. I know Tasha's going to wrap things up. We have another poll question, some final notes. Budget message comes out tomorrow. The bulk of the message at the top is our fiscal situation and a lot of these answers to our homelessness crisis. And then we get into crime and blight and some other and economic development and other issues. We'll share that with everybody who signed up so you can read it. It comes to City Council for a vote in a week. And then we have discussion and debate for a few months. And then in June, we have a final vote on the budget. And that's when we make the really tough trade-off. So we're going to need you to be engaged in this process so we don't just get more of the same, which will lead to the exact same outcomes we have on the streets today. We've got to do things differently if we want different outcomes. And that's what I'm asking you to do, is to be here. Thank you for that. Take a look at the budget message, stay engaged with our team, and please help advocate. There are a lot of ways you can do that. I'm hoping Tasha and others are going to tell you a little more about that. Tasha, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you all again so much for being here. I really appreciate you being such engaged citizens. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, and actually we had a ton of questions at the end about how folks can get involved, how they can help support this message. So we're going to go ahead and start this last round of polling. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen. If you're willing to help advocate for this budget message to get folks indoors and expand our solutions to homelessness, please vote yes, and we'll be contacting you with so many different ways to support, whether that's sending an email into your council member or joining us in person or simply telling your friends about what we need here in San Jose. We'll leave this question open for another couple of seconds. Mayor, while we have folks answering this, do you want to say any final words?
Well, I think you covered it pretty well, Tasha. I think the most important thing is that ultimately elected officials need to hear from constituents that you want to see results. You want to see different outcomes. And that you believe to get different outcomes, we need to push ourselves. We need to try new things. We need to be more pragmatic. We need to at least experiment with things like safe sleeping, safe parking. We need to look at congregate shelter again. We need to remove barriers to building housing in our downtown and near transit. We need to invest in job training and job placement. If you're clear that you are going to hold us accountable to different outcomes, to achieving different outcomes, and you want us to be more pragmatic and to push the envelope, I think if you communicate that to us as your elected officials and you do it consistently and clearly, I think you can help create the conditions for elected officials to make difficult trade-offs. In the absence of a groundswell of grassroots engagement and people saying that they want to see something different, they want to see us be more pragmatic, more practical, really push the envelope, more cost effective. You expect us to end the era of encampments. Without you really pushing us, it becomes very easy for elected officials to default to the status quo. We come up with 1,000 reasons for why things are the way that they are today. And we say, well, there's must be a good reason we're here. And here's all the reasons that it's really hard to change. And we need your help to force us to change, to do things differently, to do the hard things. And that's what I'm asking you to do, is to help me, to help you, to move our city forward by pushing us, hold all of us accountable. City, county, state, our elected reps. We'll have more information in the coming weeks about how you can do that. But we need you to advocate and really push us. Otherwise, the forces of the status quo win, and we spend the dollars the same way. And guess what? We get the same outcomes. I don't think any of us want the same outcomes. So I appreciate everybody being here. I think the poll is probably done. Tasha, anything else? Or are we ready to wrap up?
No, we're all done. We are ready to wrap it up. I just want to thank everybody again for joining. I know this is Monday night, a little late, so we really appreciate you guys being engaged. We'll be following up. I know there's still hundreds of questions that we didn't get to, unfortunately, tonight, so there will be some follow-up via email. But thanks again for being engaged.
Thank you all so much. Budget message comes out tomorrow. We'll send it out via email for those who want to give it a read. Look forward to your feedback, your questions, and thank you so much again for being engaged residents and helping us move our city forward. I'm very grateful to you all. Have a great night. Thank you so much.